Hello, and welcome to Scuttlebutt, the War Movie Review Podcast. We're happy to have you with us as we take a look at films from the dawn of cinema to today. We aim to provide a raw and unapologetic review of each film's cinematography, historical accuracy, and delivery. In the process of analysis, certain details will be revealed. These spoilers are only divulged to ensure a fair assessment of each film. We ride against the Russian guns this week with Tony Richardson's 1968 Crimean War Epic, The Charge of the Light Brigade. As always, I'm joined by Mike A.
Hello.
Mike B.
Yep.
Nate.
Smack it 3 times if it's a new ride.
And this week's special guest and reoccurring friend, I fucked it up.
No, keep going. Keep going.
You're good.
And this week's special guest, recurring co-host and friend of the podcast, Sean.
Glad to be back.
What's up,
Good
dude?
to have you. Yep.
I'm glad I got Mike on that one. That made me feel good.
You got me too. I just laughed silently.
I was gonna
graphic depiction of British sex displayed across the scene.
I was gonna yell "This is not love," but
my favorite quote from the whole movie is 5 minutes in, where they're at the ball and he says, "Too much Swiss and tits for me." You know?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Mine is where he feeds the guy lettuce and he turns into like Nigel Thornberry. Just like gum in your chops.
Well, don't insult Tim Curry like that. I mean, that's
Smash it.
Yeah.
No, it's Nigel Thornberry. Oh yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that, Sean. Thank you.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely had that same vibe, but it's Nigel fucking Thornberry. But you can actually see him. He's not some redheaded big nose dude.
He I don't know what actor played. I can't remember his name, but he looks very good. It was very well cast.
Trevor Howard.
See the real have you ever seen the real photo of the real Lord Cardigan? He looks just like him. It was very well done.
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't. But yeah,
not many people I know personally can have a mustache or beard like that, and it's it's a very cultivated thing.
Yeah.
So Nathan is one of those people. For people that don't know what he looks like.
I'm gonna like the day I shave, I'm gonna try to time it with a real period movie and do a full on broadside look.
There was one time where There was one time where Nate and I jumped on the cam thing, and when he popped up, he had no beard. I didn't know that he was going to be shaving, and it startled me a little bit, just because I was not expecting it. I was
It's a frightening thing.
Yeah, the double chin is frightening. I will admit.
It's like you never know. He's either a thumb or it's Lord Cardigan. You don't know what you're going to get. So are we going against the Russian guns or we robbing a bank in the central Ohio? I don't know what's going on. But, it's got to be an adventure.
Well, and honestly, I don't say this because I generally just fucking hate the excessive facial hair on people, especially with this film. I'll get into a lot of the shit that I hate about that. That's one of them. But Nate, you do look better, not just because of the double chin, which I can relate to.
Right.
You got more chins than a Chinese phone book, but so it's not just because of that. It's you do look good with a beard.
Yeah.
You're one of those people that looks good with a beard, and I hate to say that, but yes, it's very few and far fucking between that I'm gonna say that.
When you can do a complete circle around your head with facial hair, you can
well, yours is a really
my sideburns
really
are as
oval.
long as my fucking hair at this point, so it's just it goes all the way around.
No, it's still a pretty defined oval. Let's not ingratiate ourselves. Yeah, you pull it out. Obviously, what the fuck are you doing?
It's like a video game when the skin texture is stretched out.
It's like the beginning of Mario 64.
Unless you gel that shit out and you fucking style it to stick straight out like that, it's not fucking. It's
if
not your
I
profile.
actually gave 2 fucks about my fucking facial hair, oiled it and actually took care of it, this is me. This is me. I literally wake up and this is it, and I don't.
Hashtag no makeup.
Nothing. Yeah. Hashtag. Yeah.
God damn it.
Yeah.
God knows what dwells in there, man.
Snacks, dude.
Maryland.
The dog.
A lot of Old Bay and snacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in that order.
I'm like a bottom feeder.
All right, so with that, the facial hair in the film is interesting as fuck.
Yeah,
What's that era?
The time
Yep.
period. It's the same period. What year is it? Again,
1844, or I'm sorry, 1854.
1854.
54.
So it's
yeah,
Civil
I had
War. It's a little bit
yeah.
close to Civil War.
Yes,
for our context, yeah.
You could call this the precursor to what the American Civil War would look like. This conflict.
And it was post Mexican American War and pre American Civil War. So
this is the first. This is the first rifle, the first conflict that the Minier rifle and the Minier ball and like rifled, really like both sides had rifled weapons were used in.
This is a very revolutionary war. I know this is a little bit unconventional. Like, we're not giving our real opinions of it first. Maybe we'll just go off like on tangents like this for the episode. Might be cool.
No, we can give our opinions. Like we're just
no, it doesn't, because this is going really well. But no, it's a very revolutionary war because there was like war correspondence were a big thing for the first time. Like photography in war was a big thing. Photography had been out for like 30 years, but it really was the first time that they could really, do it on a battlefield setting. And just like Sean said, it was a precursor to what you would see, 5-6 years later in the States. And it's a very interesting time too, not just for technology and like warfare and stuff, but really just for like communism and certain political movements in Europe and how things are going. Well, this is after the 1848 revolution and stuff. I'm just saying it's an interesting time as far as that.
Oh no, I'm watching
concerned.
Nathan try to twirl his fucking mustache. Sorry,
Brian. I was like,
just don't fucking just stop.
Yeah, he kind of did it.
You got
it. Great, but no, it's a very interesting time. It's a very revolutionary time, and I don't think people realize that how the 1850s were.
This conflict unfortunately gets overshadowed by the American Civil War. That's kind of how you hear about it in school. Is like modern warfare tactics were kind of showed in the modern rifles were kind of showed in the Crimean War and what they would do with old tactics. But in the American Civil War, and you kind of just move along and you don't really learn anything about it. And this movie sent me down a huge rabbit hole to find out about the Crimean War and about the charge and
how important the entire conflict was for European and actually world history, inevitably.
Yes.
Yeah, it's insane, but yeah,
it's insane. This movie, I watched it the first time and I really liked it. Brian invited me to come on, and watching this a second time and learning about the battle, learning about the charge, and the whole Crimean campaign, my opinion has kind of lessened from it.
Right now I'm where you are because I don't know jack shit about the Crimean War, and I thought this was pretty damn entertaining. I was pretty damn entertained by the whole thing.
Yeah, it's an entertaining movie. Historically, there's a lot wrong with it. It gets the certain beats right, especially when you get to the charge as to what happened. It gets kind of most of those beats right, but there's a couple of things historically that they could have done better, and it could have been shown better, and the movie just kind of didn't take that and kind of made shit up. Especially the first part. Captain Nolan wasn't even in the 11th Hussars. He was in the 15th Light Dragoons. He was not under Lord Cardigan's command, really, at any point, from all the research I've done. He was part of the British Army in India. They kind of touch on that. British officers, if you served in India, you weren't liked. There was a stigma against them, that you were lazy, even though you were probably only the ones who had seen combat, but you were lazy. That was the stigma against the Indian officers. That's why Lord Cardigan doesn't like him. But they didn't. I don't think the two had even really met before going to the Crimea. Nolan was attached to Raglan's staff, and he was actually sent over early to go into Varna in Bulgaria, Romania. My mind is blanking on where that is. But that's where the Turks initially turned back the Russian advance into past the Danube River before the Allied army went. And Nolan was looking for remounts for the cavalry. He didn't find any suitable horses for the cavalry. But before that, he wasn't even traveling with the Light Brigade or anything like that. He was told he was already there. So that whole part, like early on with Nolan and everything, Nolan and Cardigan kind of clashing, that's kind of made up. Now, Cardigan would do shit like that. He would arrest officers. He would, for bullshit reasons, and ask officers or NCOs to spy on officers, and they would either refuse, or he would then, as you see, basically not promote them anymore. Or they would spy on him, and he would get in trouble for that, as they were demanding court martials, and he was very scandalous, Cardigan, early on. But they kind of inserted Nolan into that role to kind of give some clash, but it's BS for what I researched.
Let me ask this: did the black bottle thing happen?
I don't know the black bottle thing happened. Actually, shit, it might. Shit like that.
This is a gentleman's table, so
reasons
I mean,
he
champagne
would
only.
get up and arrest officers and accost officers for shit like that.
Okay.
And then it would get into the newspapers because nobody really, Slow News Day. You talk about what Lord Cardigan is harassing his officers in the 11th Hussars about.
So literally like pure like it's almost like
October
paparazzi.
7th,
Just stupid,
1853.
like paparazzi kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
paparazzi shit.
Yeah. I got a question, and this is just because I don't know that much. I didn't know much about this war, and I did like a quick little like research, like very very cliff note version. But Sean, if you could summarize the whole, like, I guess the Crimean War as a whole, is something easy that could be kind of said?
It's a little not easy.
Yeah.
Basically, France and Britain and Piedmont, Sardinia is actually there. Came to the aid of Turkey because Turkey was fighting Russia, and the Russians had crossed the Danube River down in Romania. Right, they were pressing on to take Constantinople. That was probably their goal. The British and French guessed that was their goal, and the French Louis Napoleon, the Second Empire, got into a scrap with Nicholas I over who would be the rightful protector of Christians that went to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. I just butchered that pronunciation. Basically, Nicholas I wanted to be the true protector of Christians, Orthodox Christians, the true religion as he thought. And Louis Napoleon found a good excuse to bring France back onto the national stage because remember, they had the Bourbon Restoration. Now we have the Second Empire. He's a Napoleon. He's going to bring the French back on. He wanted to be the true defender of Christians, quote unquote. Basically, he found a good excuse to declare war on Russia, and so did Britain, to try and stop them from taking Constantinople, stop them from having that warm water port, and basically found a good excuse to start this war. And it was called, the Turkish question, or the Eastern question is what this is called, as the Ottoman Empire declined and the Russian Empire gained power and started to press ever further into Europe and further south to take up that Ottoman territory. So with the stately quadrille of power, this was found that France and Britain basically used that excuse to try and beat back Russia and destroy the Black Sea Fleet, which had blown up the Ottoman fleet. They found this reason to go and try and push back the Russians. And it started this horrible conflict, which 1 billion people died. It was one of the worst run wars Britain was ever involved in. France, for the most part too, but they also censored their press. This is the first time Britain had been to war since Waterloo. So they did not have their best command in them, as it's kind of come across in the movie very well.
Right.
This was like how not to run an army was the Crimean War. It was absolutely awful. It was a Crimean blunder is usually what it's called. It was a disaster, an unmitigated disaster on their part.
Okay.
And they eventually won just because they.
Okay, that was my last question. Was technically, I mean, I know I read kind of like who had won technically, but like in your opinion of studying this conflict of the deep dive you did, I mean, who really kind of won in the end, or was it kind of like that, like, we won, and then everyone goes home kind of thing?
One of that kind of thing.
Okay.
They kind of declare victory and leave.
Okay.
This did do a lot to kind of make the Russian army reform, and a lot of naval treaties came out of this, and it kind of reshaped. It would eventually lead to the reshaping of the Balkans and the rise of those nations down there. When the Ottoman Empire crumbled, those nations would rise up and become the Balkan nations that would lead us into World War I, or to lead up into World War I. That kind of comes out of this.
Yep.
So I know how they use some things liberally for plot devices, like you'd mentioned with Nolan. Like they wanted to show Cardigan's character and how they trained the cavalrymen, so they just interjected him into the story earlier. One thing I did like, and I was wondering if it was plot device or was real, was the multiple times where the British officers, the high-ranking officers, were mistaken of like where they were fighting or all that things. Like the one point where the guy can't sleep and the French cavalry are riding, and he goes, "Wake up to arms! The French are here."
That is
like,
Lord Raglan is who that is, and he lost his arm at Waterloo. It's called like the last shot of Waterloo, like took Lord Raglan's arm, and he would do that. he would be command in battle, and he goes, "You have to march there against the French," and they'd be like, "Oh, the French are our allies. You mean the Russians?" Goes, "Oh yes, of course." Like
Really?
what
Wow.
little orders he would actually give out, because he was a horrible commander. But yes, he would do that. He would call the enemy the French. And yeah, he made a mistake like that one time. The French cavalry rode in. He freaked out that the French were here.
They show that in the movie.
Yeah, that would happen all the time.
Interesting, because that's very fascinating that you say this is the first time in 40 years they actually went to war. And so also there's another point where there's like a French general who's like passing out. And
That is Saint Arnaud. He did not die right at the Alma. He did die very quickly into the campaign.
Okay, I was wondering,
just after that, like during the siege of Sevastopol, he died, and he was replaced by Pellier. Was his name? He was punched by another French general after that.
I'm really glad to find out that that's true, because I thought that was really cool. And you just don't know sometimes, like with that niche stuff, if it's like a plot device or if it actually happened.
No, that is real. There's points that they hit that could do the job, but the real story is even more horrible. Like it's just, that's why I think they could have cut some of the Cardigan Nolan stuff out, cuts that out in the beginning to just have more Raglan, Cardigan, more of that stuff when they're in the Crimea.
Well, that's the thing, I mean, I feel like this movie really does a great job of trying to show how the 1850s was. Like this, is, again, it's a very interesting part of history. People don't really think about this era of like the Industrial Revolution. It's more like either earlier 1800s or like later,
or like
the Victorian age.
During World War One.
Yeah, it's like 1910 or like 1814. Like you really don't get this era for Britain. You just know that Britain was doing really well around the world and that they had a great empire.
The Victorian era.
And but it's very interesting, and I love how they spent a lot of time to try to show that, like where the soldiers come from and all that things, kind of stuff. But they did
just
spend,
like blatantly lie during the recruiting.
Yeah, right.
So much has changed.
And I love how the guys get their money stolen once they join. It's like you just sew it into your clothes. You fucking idiot. Like like this is your comrades. But they did go overboard with it. Because again, they were trying to beat, I think, in my opinion, a point home a little bit too much.
Yeah,
but it's really cool.
It's kind of well done. There's points I like where the officers are talking about are jokingly making the new officer smack his horse so it bucks around, and they're joking around, and meanwhile the men in the back are drilling endlessly to get up and on the horses. Like who's taking this seriously?
The guy with the shattered fucking knee and everything.
Ugh,
I really liked although I do think they did stay on it a little longer than I was expecting of the movie. There was a lot more at home drilling than I thought there would be in the movie. But what was in it in terms of the drilling, not the conflict between Nolan and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name.
Cardigan.
The Cardigan. I really liked the whole straw foot, and these guys don't know how to read. They don't even know their left and the right foot, and the training of that, and then him getting I can't remember just the frustration with Cardigan, and then him being drunk. And and
he asked him to spy on Nolan.
Yeah,
and that was something he would do. Yeah, that was something he would ask NCOs to spy on officers and report back to them what they were saying about him. And
the sergeant major, he said, "Yeah, I've been 20 years since I was a private, and I worked my ass off up to this, and I can't, in good faith, I just can't do it." And then he's like, "You're done."
Yeah,
and it's imagine that 20 years of your life, and then one fucking shitty officer because he says, "Oh, well, if you don't want to do this really, really unethical and immoral thing," that even at that point, so correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point, that's not good with the aristocracy. That's not kind of good. It's not encouraged, and it's not
ungentlemanly.
It's ungentlemanly. Yes, that's a great word for it. But
black bottle.
But he refuses. And then it's "Oh, you're done." And it's
you're never getting anywhere.
And then, how fucked up is that?
Yeah, that's the regiment. He controls the regiment. He bought that commission.
Absolutely.
But
it's
it was purchased,
10,000 pounds a year.
Yeah, I think he purchased that commission for 30,000 pounds or something like that.
Jesus Christ!
That was
they also touched that in the film.
Yeah.
Where it's because that's kind of I think the point with the sergeant major is he was saying, I've worked my way for 20 years to get up to this position. And then in other parts of the film, they're yeah, we didn't buy our commission.
Yeah,
and
he worked for it.
Exactly.
In the Indian Army.
Right, exactly. And so it's so a guy like Cardigan, Yeah, he just buys his commission.
Yeah, and he's your commanding officer that
Right.
you have to follow.
which is just insane to me. I mean, I know it happened. I'm not that naive in my history to know that didn't happen. But like, it's always when I see it in movies, I'm always so blown away by that. It's like someone who pinky out, buys a commission and fools his way into a command of leadership and commanding guys to their death, who may or may not have any knowledge of how to properly do tactics or military
Correct.
or whatever, other than being a pompous prick and getting the glory. And it's like, I know it happened. I'm very well aware it happened. But every time I see it depicted in movies and in media, I'm always just so blown away that people can let that happen. And it's just,
Well,
I mean, I guess that comes. I mean,
welcome to most of human history. Before
Right.
World War I.
No,
I was
yeah.
just gonna say that shit up until World War One, that shit was the norm, and during
Right.
World War One, but like that's when it kind of changed. But that's a different subject.
I
But,
mean,
like, it's
you
so fucked
still,
up.
right?
It's
I
so
mean,
fucked up.
like you still get that with the modern military. Don't get me wrong. You get incompetent people.
Yeah.
That's not my point. I mean, like, I'm blown away if someone has money and they want to make a name for themselves,
Yep.
that they can then jump the line and
Yep.
just have it. And that is what
they're the gentler class. They're the better class.
Right.
That's-
I mean, it just, again, it's like every single time I see it really depicted in media and movies, it always blows me away, because for me and my history, like Mike said, like after World War One, they kind of did away with that. It's like, it's just very interesting. I mean, I know it still happens especially if someone's father is a fucking colonel, he's going to push his way up. I know that. But at least the gateway of getting in the military is there, versus like, just having the money and jumping in. Brian, go ahead.
What I think is interesting is that we see it from both sides of the spectrum, where, we had it in Fields of Honor, where, it was a guy who had a lucky number. He was lucky and he had to sell it due to whatever situation. Like the human condition will force you to do whatever. It's either you're seeking glory, and if that means killing men so you want to look good because you can afford to, or selling away your life, or selling your soul for something because you have to. So it just happens. And luckily we live in times where it's like that, but it's not.
Well,
like
right now we do. Who knows?
every day is the most advanced human civilization's ever been. So lucky us. So all those graphics were very interesting, very 60s.
That was my I love those. I love that shit.
Yeah, they made it look like the political cartoons at the time. Like,
I mean, yeah, it looked just like those 19th century engravings in the newspapers that you see and stuff like that. It was like perfect. It was like those come to life. I was like, damn, that is awesome. I love
it's
those.
a good way to cut around not having a British fleet to show the to show in the Mediterranean, so they just do that. It's like, that's a clever way.
I thought that too before it cut to them on the ship. I was like, this is a nice little transaction, and a little way of getting past the all that crap. But at the same time, it's fucking cool,
Yeah, it's a cute way in how it continues throughout the movie. What I thought was interesting is, like, one thing I really got from this film overall was that, this was made in the late 60s. And you compare it to a film like Zulu that was made in the early 60s that's still like rule Britannia, trying to rule the waves, kind of very empire-centric. It's a much grittier version of that. And I think it really goes to show how society had changed in those 5 to 8 years. I'm not sure the actual difference between the shoot dates. I think 64 was Zulu, but anyway, it's interesting to see that, and also with the graphics as well, the influence of what was going on in the world. In 1968, obviously you have the Vietnam War going on. It's tearing the U.S. apart. But if you think about France, there's all these protests going on. In Europe, there's huge protests against what the U.S. is doing in Vietnam. So you have a very interesting influence that's, being put into this film and all its graphics. Especially when they had basically the friggin' war scene where they're all chanting and it turns into war. I was like, this is 1968.
Dude, I thought that too.
Interesting.
When those people are protesting, and then they like ride their horses through it, I was just like, this is, I mean, movies are a product of their time, no matter what it's about, and that right there, I was like, this is totally mirroring the current events when this came out. But
it was sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike, but it's also very interesting about the frame rate as well. Did you notice in the beginning it's a lot, it's like a fading frame rate, and then when they do the boat thing, that's not fading frame rate, that's like normal animation.
I didn't notice that. No.
Yeah. So like the whole beginning, like if you watch that beginning, like the frame rate's kind of like it's like half the frame rate of a normal animation, and it's fading through it. I'll pull it up. I'll pull it up near the end because I do want to go through some references that we may not talk about. But yeah,
I can kind of think when I look back now, I can kind of see that how everything is kind of like
yeah. Like when they're like starting to gear up like the things,
right?
And it's all that kind of like fading animation, and then you get to like the wartime with talking the boat, and that's full animation. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know why. Maybe it's this, this artistic vision of stuff's gearing up, so it's slow. Maybe I don't know until the war cry happens and everything's fast. But I don't.
Yeah,
know.
The shot of all the million boats going down the flag, that was like traditional like animation. That looked.
If I remember correctly,
right. Yeah. But no, dude. Like you're right in terms of like product of its time and stuff like that. And this was coming out right at that time when movies were like, we're gonna allow hardcore violence. We're gonna allow some nudity, and stuff like that. That's when this was really starting to happen.
It just, to me, builds into this narrative of like, sometime between 1963 and 1967, the world changed forever, because it's the difference between The Great Escape and The Dirty Dozen, difference between Zulu and The Charge of Light Brigade. It's like so much happened in those 5 years that it just is really interesting to see how it influenced all of culture and really just. Yeah, it's just really a reflection of 1968 and that time. And it's just, you see where Kelly's Heroes comes from like, a movie like this that's made a year or two before in Europe as well. It's just that interesting progression.
Despite the massive budget that this movie had, this movie was a fucking flop when it came out. And I think part of that has to do with the current events, the Vietnam War and all that.
When did it come out exactly?
68.
Yeah. Oh, what released? I was wondering. Like during Tet.
What was the budget, Mike?
I got it all pulled up right here. Yeah. So April of 68 is when it came out. And then
Walter Cronkite's saying that, America can't win in Vietnam, and let's go talk about the British folly in Crimea.
So budget was $6.5 million. At the box office, it only got $1 million.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ouch. That's bad.
So, not good.
Yep.
There were other films at the time. I think Waterloo was also a failure, and that's why Kubrick tried to get a Napoleon movie made around this time, and nobody would
never
fund
happened
him because they were like, "Dude, that doesn't pay." Like we did that,
They built sets for that, but then the movie never happened. I always love learning about movies that were never made that were about to be made.
So that's what I think. Let's get off on a tangent, but I think more filmmakers need to understand that like not everything gets there. Like 70% of projects fall apart, and that doesn't mean it's a failure. Just go to the next one. Way it goes.
Yeah, it can fucking happen. Apocalypse Now almost didn't happen.
Twice.
Right. Yeah. But well, it's cool too. Just like I was recognizing a bunch of actors in this that were in things at the time, and a lot of good actors. I thought everyone was pretty solid in this, even though if they were like, I guess it's like with Trevor Howard as Cardigan, it seems like borderline, like caricature almost, maybe even full blown character where he's like, like that all the time and shit. And but I don't know. I mean, I could see some asshole being like that back then.
Well, and here's the thing: is like going on with the acting and stuff is like. They did a good job because it reminded me how fucking much I hate British aristocracy.
Yeah.
Like the accent.
Mike, you're sounding like an American right now.
Am I not? Oh, dude, I'm an American. Oh my God. Oh Jesus Christ! You made me. Okay, so anyway,
sorry.
No, it's like it's so. It reminded me how much I hate that because it's so fucking incompetent. It's not merit based at all. Like we were just talking about, like Cardigan bought his commission. Okay, and I know that happened in not just the British military, but like all around. But like the incompetence and just the sheer you guys are fucking cowards. You guys are cowards because we get into the battle scene, which like I heard you guys want to talk about, and like we'll get into that, but like I think this would be a decent segue. It's like the fucking cowardice of the actual leaders that were supposed to be, oh, we're here, we're running the battle, we're the ones fighting it, right? Even though it's like, no, it's not. It's the poor people that you conned at the beginning of the film into fighting it that are fighting it. But hey, you guys are the ones that are going to take all the credit for it. It's like that aristocracy is just fucking, it's nauseating to me. To know that existed for, and not just then, it's everybody, and it's been that way for a long time, but it's like, Christ, no wonder eventually people were like, fuck this.
This movie does a good job of that. It really shows
very good.
Like, a very good job.
Very good. And it's not just one character or two, it's all of them. Even Dolan.
Yes.
It's like, you're an aristocratic fuck. Like, you are a rich bitch. Okay, you've got skills.
He was Midland gentry out of Ireland.
Yeah.
He came from a place with money. Like,
oh yeah, and it's like, yeah, okay. So you've got skills. You're good. You're a good horse rider. You're a okay tactician. You're still a cunt.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're still a pompous cunt. And it's like, God, I just hate that shit. And it just like viscerally gets me. But that's why I say these guys did a good job because it made me cringe. And I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah. It's like, clearly meant to, and they
exactly, yeah.
It's meant to paint how ridiculous that class is at that time.
Yes,
and they really do a good job of that. And that was actually one thing I wanted to ask, because that whole like richer class thing that again, I think you mentioned it with someone buying the commission I think it's the same time frame, but they kind of did away with that after World War One, right? I mean, I know it bleeds into World War II.
Not by choice. It just happened to be that way because.
Okay.
Really, I'll just touch on it really quick, and then we'll get back to this. But like, what happened in World War One is they had the same model at the beginning. The British, like, it was an officer that was from a wealthy family, like upper middle class and above, that would be in charge of these guys, and a huge majority of them got killed. A huge majority of them. So by like 1916, like after the Somme specifically, so like mid to late 1916, the enlisted guys were like, oh, these people are not untouchable. They're just, as they would call, blokes just like us. And that started to resonate because they're like, oh, these NCOs that we have that are from our class that worked their way up, they're more relatable. These guys are incompetent as shit and they're running our country. This is again a very, very fucking abbreviated fucking version of what actually went down.
A very similar thing happened in the Russian army. Well, the same thing happened in the Russian army in World War One. And those guys that the lower class that came up to lead were the prime breeding ground for the Bolsheviks.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. And in World War One, that was kind of that was a really big turning point in just human civilization in general. It's because you had these classes for millennia, right? Especially in Europe and like Russia and stuff like that. That I know Russia's part of Europe. Don't fucking, if you're listening to this, do not fucking say, well, Russia's part of Europe. Yeah, I get that. All right. But like, that was the point where like the lower classes actually had like everyday interaction with the upper class. And they realized, oh, these people are not better than us. They're actually worse than us because they don't have any fucking viable skills and they suck at life because they've been coddled their entire lives. And that's what started a lot of these like movements of like, no, you're not better than us. Prove it. You guys are incompetent. You guys are fucking idiots. And you're humans just like us. And that's kind of how that whole thing started in the First World War, especially in the British and like Sean was saying, the Russian military. And it also, to an extent, happened in the German military, even though their culture's a lot different. It's a lot, so you can't really compare it. The French, that also happened with the French.
The Austro-Hungarian army that blew apart once it's the Austrians and Hungarians Christ, are not our social betters.
But so yeah, you get this, like in this film, you get that clear divide. It's made very fucking abundantly clear, this divide among people. Even the higher up NCOs were still treated like shit by this class of people that had been, thinking that they were better than everyone because they had
never
money.
Told no, and you do what I want you to do because
exactly.
I'm born better than you.
Yeah. And so in World War One, that came to a head.
Right. And
So-
even within themselves, they're the same. They're doing the same thing within themselves as well. Which is nuts.
What do you mean by that?
Like officers fighting officers just because they're
Yes,
yeah.
Lord
Because-
Lucan and Lord Cardigan hated each other. They were brothers-in-law. They hated each other, which is one of the lead-ins to the how the battle happened. But
which I think they do a pretty good job depicting that in the film.
yes, they don't introduce Lord Lucan, who was the commander of the division of cavalry, the cavalry division commander for the British forces in Crimea, so the heavy and the light brigade. They don't introduce him till the war has started, and he bears a lot of he. It's difficult to pin his blame for the charge, but he's also a huge piece of shit. Lord Lucan was the lord in the county of Mayo, and he was called the Eviscerator. What was his nickname? I want to say the Eviscerator. Basically, he kicked out a bunch of fucking people during the potato famine. He was the number one fucking person that kicked people out, tried to close down the workshops that were feeding the poor people. The Irish could actually feed themselves. He wanted to shut all the workshops down that were run by the government because he didn't want to pay paupers to pay priests. So he basically mass evicted people out of the county of Mayo. Thousands of people died, starved to death because of him. And he was a piece of shit. What blame he has for the charge is he's not a redeemable person.
Did Lord Cardigan have a nickname at the end of this other than Black Bottle?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not I know of.
What was his life? What was
Lord
his life?
Look-On is the name you probably heard. That was
Maybe
the nickname. That was for Lord Lucan from the Battle of the Alma, where he literally followed orders, which were to sit still because Lord Raglan didn't want the cavalry to ride off and get killed, because that was a Wellington thing. He was literally in the shadow of Wellington, which is that statue they're kind of wheeling around.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was literally at the Battle of the Alma when the French had kind of been totally written out of this, and so have the Turks. But the French kind of climbed the cliffs of the Alma on the left flank where Saint Arnaud talks about how they're gonna go. The French will scale the cliffs to the left, and the British will knock on the door. The British assaulted up those cliffs twice and were repulsed because Lord Raglan's orders were just to be like, the infantry will advance. Those were his orders, and they just left up to the superiors to figure out, his superiors to figure out what to do. As the French started to take the Russian positions on the left of the Battle of the Alma, and the British finally took the Great Redoubt, the front redoubt you see in the film. As they took that and started to push the Russians back, the Russians broke and started to flee. That would have been the perfect time for the Light Brigade to charge and charge after them, and that's what they're literally supposed to do, is to cut down the infantry as they run away.
Yep.
And Lord Raglan said, no, we don't do that. Have them escort the guns in between, and the heavy Light Brigade on both sides. So everybody who knows anything about warfare, which is most of the infantry, saw that the cavalry just kind of sat there and let the Russian army get away to Sevastopol. And he earned the nickname Lord Look-On. Lord Cardigan didn't have a nickname. He was actually left shortly after the battle during the winter, after the charge of the Light Brigade. He wasn't around for much longer. Neither was Lord Lucan, because the cavalry was also gone. But
And by not there long, meaning like he literally went back to England, or did he?
Oh yeah, he had a private yacht. He came on a private yacht, Lord Cardigan.
Okay.
Lord Lucan actually slept. He was actually in the camp with the cavalry. Lord Cardigan had rheumatitis or something with his lungs. He had to sleep on his private yacht. And have you ever seen a photo of the Balaklava harbor? It is packed. It is a tiny little harbor, and it is packed full of fucking ships. And his yacht was on like the end, so all these supply ships had to like navigate around his fucking yacht to get in. Anytime he was like 2 miles away from the cavalry camp, so anytime any report had to happen, they had to ride 2 fucking miles to go to talk to Lord Cardigan. Which is why in the film, when you see they're trying to force him into his britches to get him out to the battle, that happened. He was on his private yacht.
They showed him on a ship.
Yeah, he says that in the movie, like, he wants you to come onto his private yacht tonight.
Yes,
that's.
she's
like, ooh,
18 inches too close.
Yeah, that happened. The 10th thing happened, where they kept him.
Oh my god! I thought I had fucking shitty leadership in the military.
Yeah,
Fuck.
the tents that happened. Lord Cardigan made him put the tents. Lord Lucan made him redo it. Lord Cardigan made him redo it.
Iraq is like Toys R Us compared to Crimea. No.
It's just like it's so fucking.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad.
So frustrating.
Like,
it's like
that happened. That woman is also Fanny Duberly. Duberly.
What a name.
What a name.
Fanny Duberly.
She kept a diary. She was with her officer husband, who was in the cavalry. I believe he was the paymaster, who they really shit on in this movie. She did not have an affair with Lord Cardigan. He had affairs with other officers' wives, but not her. She was actually she was 24 at the time, and that's how we know a lot of this stuff with the camp and she hated Lord Cardigan. That's how we know a lot of what went on. She had a diary. You see her writing it at one point in the movie. But we have that diary today. That's how we kind of get her perspective on things.
I could totally see the tents are too close, the tents are too far.
It never
apart.
happens today. They never do that.
No, never. Doesn't happen in fucking Conneaut every fucking goddamn time. But
is that why you have barbed wire around your tents?
It's to keep the drunks out like you, man. That's what it does. It wasn't the drunks out.
Hey,
listen, that person may or may not have been involved in our tent. We can't confirm or deny.
He might have been.
That was the guy at De Rosa.
Smith.
We'll say Smith.
We can't
Smith came up to me.
He's like, fell into your fake barbed wire entanglement outside your camp.
He's like, hey, I fell into your barbed wire, and I'm like, oh, you're that guy? He's like, yeah. I was like,
yes. This person who happens to get whenever we hang out happens to end up drunk under things. So
right
in Ohio, of all places. As long as it's not under a train derailment, Mr. Smith, if you're listening. But anyway,
tell me about Ohio.
Like before we really jump into the battle, and we'll get to the IMDb and everything. Even though we really alluded to like the campaigns leading up to Sevastopol. Again, the 1850s is very interesting because really it wasn't until the American Civil War where they realized that using modern weapons and Napoleonic tactics are really bad. You have rifles that are accurate out to like 800 to 1,000 yards, not realistically, but at very long ranges compared to when these tactics were developed. And you really get a taste of that. And something they did really allude to in this, this in reality was the death of cavalry in a way, and the inability that cavalry really brings. Like the ending, how they have all the mutilated horses. That was very interesting, and that was very stark. And also, even on the voyage over. I think that was the thing that caught me the most was they have rough seas and the horses die.
They're pushing the horses off.
Yeah. That happened in Calamity Bay. They basically these poor horses, they had never one day had enough fodder. The commissariat supply was so bad. Horses were dying left and right. They were constantly exhausted and underweight and raggedy. They just could not keep anybody supplied in the siege of Sevastopol. It was awful, as I keep saying, but it's what it's displayed in the movie, it's like 10 times as bad in real life. The condition of the horses, it was 10 times as bad.
Jolly good then, yes.
Yes.
And that's something that I think I kind of want to counter what Brian said just a little bit. Is that, Brian, I do agree. I do think this is the start of the end of cavalry. I don't think as Mike's cringing every time I say the word.
Fucking God, yeah. Like all of you.
Cavalry to me, I feel like ends in World War I officially.
With the machine gun.
That's
it.
No.
It.
Do you know when the official? No, I agree with you. That's what I should have restated it as.
Okay.
Yes, it's really the end of that lineage.
I think it's the start and the very big decline.
Well, mutilated horses from grape shot. That's compared to like the Roman cavalry and how really far back lineage of cavalry goes. But the real death of cavalry is in Bataan in 1942 when the U.S. cavalrymen are ordered to eat their horses. There were some cavalry charges on Bataan in the Philippines in the early part of 1942 before they really pulled back into Bataan, the perimeter and stuff. But that was really the death of the cavalry, if we're going to be honest, was when the men were ordered to eat their horses. 1942. And that's, 90 years after this? So, yes, it really is the beginning of that. And there also is cavalry, in the Civil War and everything. Jeb Stuart and whatever. There's very famous times that happened and things. Even in, Fields of Honor. There's cavalry and stuff. So Waterloo, well, that's earlier. Regardless, this is really the end. This is modern technology, rifling, grape shot is becoming factors. And they keep coming back to that, where like they're referring to Waterloo and things where, whatever, that's a little bit more traditional of the day of battle and stuff. Now you have trenches. Now you have people that are tired all the time because they were in the trenches all night, and you can't react now. Like they had that one scene with the general.
Which
It's
happened.
warfare. Yeah, like warfare is not becoming a singular event or we're at Yorktown or we're at Lexington or we're at Concord. No, it's becoming a 24/7 thing because it's now modernized, and because of that, people are overworked. They can't react enough, and different things can get pushed that traditionally, wouldn't be factors. So.
No. Okay.
Well, I'm not from Wisconsin,
cavalry.
so.
Is that the way I'm supposed to say it?
I mean, yeah, it's cavalry.
Okay, so when I see it, I can say it. But if you told me to recall it, I want to say cavalry.
Right, which
But
is the
I get
second
it.
definition that I just
Cavalry. I get it.
Cavalry.
Cavalry.
Cavalry. It's not the air cal, it's the air cav, right?
Right.
Right.
So cavalry.
Cavalry. Yes.
Cavalry. Okay. All right. We're going to do this again next episode because I think it's been 3 episodes in a row.
It's never going to end, but I'm just
Yeah.
going to keep posting these 2 fucking
That's
links for you
fine.
guys.
That's fine. Keep doing it. Yeah. That's fine. I'm down. I'm down to learn. That's fine. I'm not dead set in my ways. I'm not a New Englander. It's fine.
Oh, it's just okay.
Stubborn to the end.
Yeah, it's all good. It's. I mean, it's not all good, but it's one of those Nietzsche things. Friedrich
Niche.
Yep.
Niche, you dumb fuck.
Nietzsche.
So, Sean,
Nietzsche.
is it correct that they actually did go into battle at a half trot like that?
Yes.
How correct is it?
Yes. That's when they get to the charge. They did go at a half trot. Because you don't immediately start to gallop. They were about a mile away. Your horse would have been tired out by the time it got to the end. Do we want to dive into that about the Balaklava? And so with Balaklava is the harbor supply in Sevastopol. It was about 5 miles away, give or take. This was the smaller bay. The French had another bay that was a little closer to Sevastopol. So this was the main base supplying the British Army to the south of Sevastopol. So the Russians, they never fully encircled Sevastopol. After the Battle of Alma, they could have basically marched into the town. There were no real defenses. But Burgoyne, who was the chief of engineers for the British Army there, convinced Lord Raglan that you have to take a city with heavy guns. You have to do it by the book. If you heard the name Burgoyne before, it is Burgoyne of Gentleman Johnny of Saratoga fame, another British general involved with a military disaster. So they marched to the south of Sevastopol to this long route, give the defenders basically enough time to fortify Sevastopol, sink the Black Sea Fleet in the harbor so the British can't even steam into the harbor, which is kind of what the whole point was, to destroy the Black Sea Fleet and take Sevastopol. Well, they sunk the fleet so they couldn't get into the harbor. Great job. And they spend weeks trying to get the guns up, to get the harbor set. 3 weeks they spend till the trenches are really set and put around Sevastopol. And they never even closed it off from the north. The Russian could sail through the Sea of Azov to supply it from the north. It wasn't until the whole next year they were finally able to cut off Sevastopol. So that siege is going on. And in south you have Balaklava, the Balaklava harbor, that is defended by these redoubts, which are depicted in the film. They are manned by British troops. In the film, they were actually manned by Turkish troops. The Turkish army has been totally cut out of this movie. There was a huge Turkish contingent. There was about 900 Turks defending these redoubts, and they were attacked by a Russian army of 30,000 men. And they held out for 2 hours before they finally were forced to retreat. And once these Turks retreated, that's when Lord Raglan shows up, Lord Cardigan shows up, and the Fenton, the photographer and war correspondent, show up too. And all they see is the Turks retreating, going through the cavalry camp, doing a little looting as they retreat. And so now this huge Russian army is attacking into Balaklava. This is where then the 93rd Highlanders formed their thin red line and beat back the Russian cavalry, stopped the Russian cavalry in its tracks as they tried to ride into the harbor. And then they are also attacked by the Heavy Brigade, which are not in this movie. None of that is in this movie. Heavy Brigade, you briefly see it when Lord Lucan gets one of the orders from Lord Raglan, and they are the cavalries with the bobby hats on. That is the Heavy Brigade. The Heavy Brigade had already seen action. They had charged into a huge group of Russian Cossacks who were their cavalry. They had a lot of it, but they weren't very well trained, and they were able to beat back the Cossacks.
Is
So
that why
now,
they were kind of like going, what the fuck at that point? They were like,
yes. So now you have the instance of the Light Brigade. The other brigade, the Heavy Brigade, has gone and done a cavalry charge and seen action. So now you have the Light Brigade sitting at the end of this valley in a really good position as the Russian army is trying to march down this valley and has taken the posts around to the left and the right of the valley, have taken those redoubts, the captured redoubts on the south side. So if you were looking at down the valley, they would be to your right. They're on the left and the right in the captured redoubts. And the main Russian army is a mile down this valley. So Light Brigade is at the end of this valley in a pretty good spot where they said the cavalry are to take ground where it stands. That was one of Lord Lucan's, Lord Raglan's orders. Or there's a lot of lords. I gotta fucking keep them straight.
Yep.
That was one of the vague orders that Lord Raglan had given to Lord Lucan. So we put them at the end of the valley where they were actually in a good position where none of the Russian forces could really advance quickly unless because they were be threatened by the Light Brigade. So the Heavy Brigade comes around and also joins the Light Brigade now that they're there. So then, as Lord Raglan is looking on, he sees what is supposedly the guns of the redoubts being dragged away. And because he was a student of Wellington, Wellington had never lost a gun. He wanted those guns retaken. So he sends an order, and I will pull up the order so you can read it. The order that he says in the movie is exactly how it was written down. And it was written down in this swooping script of General Airy, who actually wrote down the order. And that order is still preserved. You can actually still see it. It is in one of the museums. I will try to find a photo to post it for you guys too. So he gets this order to move forward, attack the infantry immediately. There's French, one of the first orders comes in that you are to move forward. There's infantry to your left, stopped the guns being taken away. Which there's no infantry to the left. He gets confused about that because the infantry, as you saw, Nolan was trying to get that guy out of the camp to move towards Balaklava. That actually happened. The general said, "No, I've been in the trenches. I'm going to have breakfast." That was the infantry he thought was coming down from Sevastopol to be on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't happening. So now he receives this order that you have to attack immediately, and it is given to Captain Nolan, who was the aide-de-camp and part of Raglan's staff. Now Nolan he was, as I said earlier, he was in the 15th Light Dragoons. He was not in the Hussars. He had actually served in the Austrian army for a brief period. Had observed other armies. He had this idea of cavalry is supposed to act. It is supposed to fight wherever it comes. It can even break infantry squares if you're quick enough and dashing enough. He had all these fancy ideas about what cavalry could do. And Lord Lucan and Lord Cardigan are kind of ducks. They just they'll do whatever they're ordered to. They kind of don't know any better. And Lord Raglan is up about 500 feet above them. He's up on that giant hill where he could see the whole valley. He could see what's going on. But Lord Lucan is all the way at the bottom with the Light Brigade. They can't see anything. They can't see over the hills. So Nolan is now getting very impatient. He wants the Light Brigade to act. Lord Lucan is just sitting there, not doing anything. Now he has an order to attack immediately to stop the guns being carried away. He rides down with that order, and what he says to Lord Lucan, that will you carry out the order immediately? Will you do this? Will you carry out Lord Raglan's orders to attack? That is actually what he said. So now Lord Lucan has an aide-de-camp in front of him telling that Lord Raglan wanted him to attack immediately, right now to the front. That is, if an aide-de-camp comes up and gives you an order, it's supposed to be as if the general himself was sitting in front of you, giving the order. So now he has the order to attack. When he asked Nolan where, that's the famous quote, "There are your enemy, there are your guns," down the valley. He kind of just gestures down the valley. The valley that Lord Lucan can see is straight ahead. Attack forward immediately. It's right down the valley. Not to the right, over the hill where the guns are being carried away. They're over the guns Lord Raglan wanted them to attack are over a hill to the right. He can't see them. So Lord Raglan gives this super vague order that is, he can't see what he's supposed to attack. He doesn't put himself in the footsteps of Lord Lucan on the bottom. He doesn't know what he's supposed to attack. He's just given this vague order that now this aide-de-camp has just pointed to where he's supposed to attack to go down the valley. So as the Light Brigade is sitting there, he goes and joins the 15th Light Dragoons, and Lord Lucan has the order to attack down immediately, so he orders Lord Cardigan to go forward. The Heavy Brigade is also out of this film, but they start forward at the slow trot. Lord Cardigan sets the pace. Nolan is off with the 15th Light Dragoons, who were in the front. It was not the Hussars in the front, it was the Light Dragoons, which is actually displayed in the movie. As you see, they have the Dragoon hat on. So as they go down, they start to get down the valley. This all happens in about 20 minutes. So as they go down, it is seen from the top that Nolan starts to ride forward to the front. Now, this whole thing in the movie where he's shouting, wrong way, fair right, there's a big debate whether or not he even said anything. He had plenty of time to tell Lord Cardigan when he was up front with him and Cardigan and Lucan to tell them where to go. He didn't. Now he starts to ride forward. He was off with the 15th Light Dragoons with his friend, that officer that he sees. That was his friend. He was with him. He had plenty of time to talk to him about what they were about to do, which he probably did, that they were going down the valley. So as he rides forward and that officer says, no, Nolan, that won't do. We have a long way to go. That part is cut out of the movie, but that was what he said. So obviously he thought, that officer that was right next to Nolan thought, we're going down the valley towards those Russian guns. They're going to attack artillery from the front.
Yeah.
So
massive clusterfuck
from the right and the left. Now, as he goes forward, there's seen that he was going forward. He didn't shout anything. There's a big debate whether or not that shell exploded, whether it killed him and that made his horse veer off and jerk to the right as he was in his death spasms, or whether he tried to go forward as just because he wanted to get an actual here, or if he was trying to redirect the brigade. There's a bit of controversy about that, but the fact of the matter is, the only person who had heard Lord Raglan's orders, had seen the top of the battlefield from where they were sitting, Lord Raglan was sitting, died in the first shell. He was killed immediately. He was the first person to die. That happened. Basically, his chest split open and he drove across the brigade, which pissed off Lord Cardigan because he didn't realize he was dead. He thought he had tried to rivet in front of him. So as they ride down, they start to gain speed. Lord Cardigan does set the pace. He is in the front the whole time. As they start to take casualties, they finally reach the guns. They are blasted by, I have my notes here, 20 battalions of infantry and 50 artillery guns as they ride into the valley.
Jesus Christ.
There was 630 men as they rode down. It lasted about 35 minutes. As they hit the guns, Lord Cardigan is in front. He is the first one to reach the guns, supposedly. It's all smoke and you can't see anything. Nobody could see anything. They saw Lord Cardigan go in with the brigade. He was at the front. Then they just kind of see him come back out. He just rides slowly back out. All he did was he got the brigade to the objective, and then he turned around and rode back. And he wasn't hit. He just, he was an idiot. He didn't know what to do. He got there, and I got my brigade back. I'm going to ride back now. I've done my job, and rode back. So his brigade is now taken so many casualties. Now they're attacking the Russian gunners that are there, and Lord Cardigan just leaves.
So he's not even fighting. He's just
not even there. Yep, he got there. He maybe swiped at a gunner, and then he turned around and said, "Done my job. I've done." And he rode back, and he wasn't hit. He rode through all that fire, and he wasn't hit. It's hysterical. Yep. And so they ride through, and as they're there, they're then attacked by that huge group of Cossacks come in, like a brigade of Cossacks come and attack them, and they are forced to retreat to then drive back through all that fire. The only reason they really got out was because the French Castilles d'Afrique was a cavalry unit. They attacked to the left. They realized what was happening, and they finally came to the Light Brigade's help, and they had cleared off the left hill. And that's the only reason they were able to get back. Anyone was able to get back, because they were still being fired at from what Russian guns were left on the right in the redoubts. In the redoubts they were there, and they were still being attacked from the front with the Cossacks now. Lord Lucan was back with the Heavy Brigade. They also charged forward. Lord Lucan was wounded in the leg, and he kept the Heavy Brigade back because he realized what was about to happen. He realized what was going on. And the only thing that the Cossacks could have just decimated the Light Brigade, they stopped because the Heavy Brigade was there. And in 35 minutes, they lost 362 horses, 110 were KIA, 196 were wounded in action, and 57 were taken prisoner. About 360 minutes of action.
Christ!
Were annihilated in 35 minutes. So
those are numbers that you get from modern warfare. Back then, that's like an embarrassing fucking defeat.
Yeah, it was awful. And immediately after that, the blame game starts going around.
Yeah, of course.
Of who it wasn't where they were in the field. It shows them where they start debating who did what happened. You've lost the Light Brigade. Oh, Eri, you've lost the Light Brigade. Like that. Not in the field of all the dead. You kind of get the point that they're there. They don't care about the men that are dying and bleeding around them.
Yeah, exactly.
And immediately Lord Cardin goes, "It was no trick of mine." He's like, "It was by some trick, but it wasn't a fault of mine." That's what he said. He tried to immediately pass the blame. Which he then tried to do after this because a bunch of people saw him ride into the smoke and then turn around and ride back. He was the first of the guns, but all the people saw was the brigade going in the smoke and then Lord Cardigan coming back alone. So it started this huge controversy that he never even made it to the guns, which he defended to the end of his life. He actually had a couple defamation lawsuits that he had made it to the guns. But it just made people realize that this guy doesn't give a fuck about anybody. He just wants to prove that he made it to the guns. He doesn't care about the men he lost. He wants to prove that he made it to the guns. But
wow,
yeah, it's something. But there's a big debate. Did the charge actually do something? Did it actually stop the guns from being carried away? No. At the end of the day, some of those guns were taken away. Supposedly, they were still bopping around during the Russian Revolution. Some war correspondents found some of them in Sevastopol. It was a total blunder, and they wiped out a whole brigade of cavalry.
Now,
in 35 minutes.
That's insane, dude. And I know, I don't believe it was from this battle, or I could be mistaken, but the Victoria Cross actually has its lineage to the Crimean War. And all the Victorian crosses are made from the same hunk of steel from a Russian captured gun from the Crimean War. And I forget if it was from Sevastopol or if it was from this battle, but it's kind of interesting. Lineage.
I think it's from Sevastopol. I remember this.
Yep, but
yeah, I think it's a gun from Sevastopol.
They're all Russian. They all date back to there, which is insane. Yeah. And that's crazy that some of the things still.
Yeah, there's as the Light Brigade was sitting there, one of the units, I believe it was one of the Hussar units, ordered their guys not to smoke, and somebody was accused of still smoking, and they arrested him basically on the spot. This was one of the NCOs. His officer had the guy arrested, so they confiscated his carbine, his saber, and all the weapons he had. But they didn't tell him to get out of line. He was just arrested there. So he just decided, well, I'm not going to leave because this is the only cavalry charge you'll likely see. And he just rode in with no weapons. There was also a guy that came right from the camp. He realized that something's going to happen. The heavy brigade's been in action. He rode to go to the Light Brigade. He was the Light Brigade's butcher, and he rode into battle with his butcher's apron and his axe.
Hell yeah!
Yeah,
that's like
whatever you got, man.
That's like fucking Rohirrim status.
Yeah, so he rode in with like an already bloodied apron and a hatchet.
He came up in one of the documentaries and he talked about braining a Russian gunner with his axe.
Yeah, that was true.
Really fucking
dude,
cool.
I would fucking surrender in a heartbeat if a bearded fucking butcher.
It's like we were talking about when the last time cavalry was used. When's the last time a battle axe was used? Well, that's up there. That's pretty recent.
It's like that they had that Syrian in
what are you talking about?
Centurion.
Yeah. It's essentially that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
that is the order that was given.
Oh, cool.
The link I just posted. It still exists. Lord, Lord Lucan got that order, and he basically realized a disaster is coming, and he ordered one of the officers to preserve the order and ride back with it. So when Lord Lucan, he eventually blamed, Lord Raglan blamed Lord Lucan that he had misinterpreted his order. He didn't know what he was doing. He had the order. So Lord Lucan had the order. Nobody in headquarters had bothered to keep a copy of it. So that was very damning for Lord Raglan that he didn't have any evidence. Nobody had any evidence. And Lord Lucan also went through this whole thing where he started fighting Lord Raglan, who was to blame, because Raglan made sure his story got told to the War Department before anyone else's did. So Lord Lucan also went through a whole fight of whose fault it was. The blame ultimately lies with Lord Raglan, Nolan, and Lord Lucan himself, who didn't try to confirm the order because it said immediate, didn't try to confirm the order, and didn't use his fucking brain to try and figure something else out. And Nolan, obviously, he was dead. It's very easy to blame him. He probably does bear most of the responsibility, as he pointed where they were supposed to go, had the order, had heard what Lord Raglan said, could see. He kind of bears the most responsibility, and he's dead. What a bonus.
Yeah.
It started this, but with Lord Lucan, it started this huge fight. Eventually, he was recalled. He gave a speech in the House of Lords and Parliament, trying to clear his name, which eventually he did. He did get promoted up in the British Army.
Of course.
Good, not great news if you're an Irish tenant on his lands, but it's nobody cared about the men who died. They cared about not having the blame laid on them.
Well, again, that's why this is a very interesting war and age, because it's like it's so much of the old world clashing with the new world. You have all this new technology, but you have all these antiquated ways in the blame game and all this, shit happening. Like, even you had mentioned that some of the generals had made sure to get their record, with the official correspondence or whatever beforehand, before other people did, to, protect their legacies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Something you see that with the war correspondents. There were these war correspondents, and they actually have one of them in the film. He's the guy with the sideburn, one of the guys with the sideburns. What am I saying? But
I was like that.
yeah, right. But he had all these dispatches he would send up from Crimea, and they'd always make sure to send them out a week after the official word got back to England. So, like, it was free press, but it was like, well, once the official narrative gets back home, then you're in, the trench reporting will get there and stuff.
Yes.
So it's this interesting, like, well, these new technologies in this new age, the Victorian era and stuff, but the old ways are still in control.
Yeah.
And it's something we see until even Sergeant York, if you really think about it. Generals trying to protect their reputation and rank and stuff, and saying, oh, well, we can use this as a cover up for that, or where can you place the blame where it doesn't touch you? So.
It gets less and less after the First World War, but it still happens. But it's not as just blatant and frequent and rampant as it had been. It's harder to, because there's more. There were more fail safes put in after the First World War, of like, okay, well, this, and this, and yeah, I'm getting off on a tangent, but like, yeah, it in this film, like. They touched on it at the very end of like, yeah, the blame game starts, but it's like, I mean, to kind of like empathize, not sympathize, but empathize with these guys is like, well, that's their entire life. That's all they have to live for. And so they're going to preserve that to the best of their ability. Like, if I look bad and this gets out, I'm fucked. They don't care if they do that to somebody else, but it's like, it's all like this survival shit, and it's like fucking. It doesn't justify it, but like it explains it.
There's a lot of extreme scapegoating. I think.
Christ!
Yeah.
It's just like
everyone saves their ass, and everyone
There's another
fights each
There's
other.
another film that we'll cover shortly for Boer War film. It's probably the only Boer War film we'll be able to cover. It's one of the better ones. It's called Break of Barant, and it's the same story. So basically, the British needed a scapegoat for their very harsh tactics against the Boers in concentration camps and stuff. So they chose a bunch of Australian officers to, hang for, hey, you did this even though you're ordered to. And guess what? The guy that ordered them to is dead. So, oh, you're following, his implied orders before he was shot by a Boer. Well, you're a commando now, and you're going to be hung for it. So, it's unfortunately what happens. But it's funny that was, 45 years after the fact. And, the same shit's still happening. But one other neat thing, before I forget it, is that we touched on this before with, like, how certain things are remembered in the modern era. Like when we talked about Zulu, the sergeant major that was there was actually recorded on the BBC in the 30s of what he went through. And they broadcast it. And unfortunately, the broadcast doesn't exist, but the transcribe still does. So, you have a really eyewitness account of a battle from the 1870s. Well, that was still true for other wars, and they actually have one of the original buglers in the 1930s went on BBC, and he recorded the bugle call that he gave when to the charge of the Light Brigade in this battle. And so it's just kind of crazy to think that 80 years after, or how many is that? 80 years after the fact, there's a recording of the guy doing something he did in the 1850s, and we really can't push it further back. There are some guys that talk about, I think, the Mexican-American Wars and the recordings in the 20s and stuff, but we really don't have a lot of modern recordings, like first-hand eyewitness accounts of that. but this is one of those early ones.
We don't have anything from like 1812, unfortunately.
No, because the first photographs from the 1820s.
Yep.
And you really had to have lived into the 1890s or really late 80s to like have any recordings at all, and that was so early technology. But
there's one famous photo from the Crimean War of like this hillside, and it's just like a sea of cannonballs. It looks
It's interesting. Photography was still a wet photography at that time. There was a little bit of dry photography, but everything was done on glass plates, and you had to be like a scientist in a way. And it's a lot that goes into it, but a lot of the photography was actually lost. There was one very famous French guy that showed up there like really early on. He took over 350 photos for magazines, and they were all lost. There's only a few hundred of like the English photographers that went over there and stuff that you really have the photos from. But you needed a whole laboratory. You needed a whole it was a very long process, and they could really only take photos of dead bodies. And that's why you see kind of, again, like a glimpse of the Civil War, because it was the same way. You'd have just glimpses of before a battle, preparing for it, and then after the fact, because you really couldn't take battlefield shots. And that's like when we had mentioned earlier in the Franco-Prussian War film, the original photos that were taken at the Battle of Sedan in 1870, they were revolutionary because he was using a dry type of photography that you could actually do that on the spot. So it's just funny how, they did the best they could for the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of watercolor paintings of this that officers did who were there. Leo Tolstoy was one of them. He was in the Russian lines.
Really?
He was in the Siege of Sevastopol. Yep. He did a lot of correspondence. There's a lot of watercolors, drawings by him of the Russian Siege of Sevastopol from the Russian side.
Yep.
There was one that he was a watercolor guy who was an officer, and it's from the documentary I was watching, and I unfortunately didn't catch the name, but he said that one of the watercolors he did was all these wounded Russians, and one guy was missing an arm, and he was riding through. It was the day after a battle or something, and this Russian guy ran up to him and was like pointing at his arm, was pointing at him, and he was like, "Oh, I cut this guy's arm off," and he grabbed his hand, and this guy burst into tears. They had a moment or something, and then he said in his the diary, he was like, "If I had all the gold in the world to give this man, I would give it to him. I owe him everything." And yesterday we were enemies, but now we're brothers, or we're linked in this way. But it's just very interesting to think about that, and you don't really get that in modern war or anything, It's just a sign of the times,
I was, you guys were talking, I did a deep dive on the animation, and funny enough, it's his name's Richard Williams, and he's an animator, or he was an animator in England for the most part, but he did the Pink Panther titles.
Really? Oh, interesting.
And I was like, it was bothering me because as you guys were talking, I'm like, I have seen this animation before and I don't know where. And then I clicked on his name, and then I clicked on stuff, and I was looking down books, and I had his book for my animation school. And I was like, that's fucking why it looks so familiar.
That lion looks like the Pink Panther.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I can totally see the Pink Panther and a lot of the stylistic title animations from the 60s and the 70s, specifically English films. And then also everything within my animation book that I just gave away to Goodwill last week after cleaning up my room.
Is that about one on Amazon?
You guys were talking earlier when I was incapacitated for a second. But yeah, the animation itself, like I think you guys said, it's like cartoons of that time, just like the static, something put in the newspaper, like a political
news
cartoon.
Propaganda.
But it's animated, and it's it was fucking. I usually hate that shit, to be honest, but I think it was really cool the way they did that, because it's it kind of brings it to life. The animation itself, like the cartoons themselves, it brings it to life, and it's they had no real way of doing that at that time, besides a static, cartoon.
Yeah, and it's all drawn in the propaganda drawings and illustrations of the late 1800s and early 1900s. I mean, you still see that style portrayed mainly in Europe, even in the States, but mainly in Europe. You see in records like around World War I, you see that kind of big-headed kind of
the caricatures,
the technique,
but
it's the techniques as well. They're engravings, and their watercolor is and they're not shaded or anything like that. It's just solid color that they drop into it, and that's how they used to do it back then. And yeah, like I say, it looks like it. I mean, if you showed me just like a screenshot of that, of any frame from that, I would believe that is from a newspaper from 1850 something.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's like, so that was actually done very tastefully. I thought, like, I really enjoyed that, and usually like I said, I can't stand that shit, but it actually, I think it added a lot because it showed, like, okay, in one aspect, it showed kind of the process, but it also saved the production a shitload of time and money by going, okay, well, they're going down, they're going to sail across here, they're going to go through the Strait of Gibraltar, and they're going to go to the Dardanelles, basically, which they would 70 years later, or whatever, 60 years later, I don't remember. I'm not good at math. And by the way, Sean, I like your pussy.
Oh, thanks. She loves to get in the shot.
Yeah, it's a very pretty pussy. So, I'll tell you what, his cat, my dad.
I saved that pussy.
All you perverts, yeah, he's seen that pussy. Yeah, but I hadn't seen that pussy.
For all you back home.
Hey, Sean. Hey,
It is
Sean.
a cat.
Sean, nice cat.
Hey,
So
thanks, Dave.
while we're here, so there's no IMFDB for this.
And I'm glad because
Glance over
I
weapons.
don't have a goddamn clue
Yeah, well,
what the hell they'd be using.
It's grape shot and sabers. But we'll
It's,
glance over weapons quick.
They say the French should have the Minier pattern rifle, the pattern 46. The British started using the Enfield pattern 1853.
Yeah.
They started with the percussion smoothbore, but they quickly got the Enfield of Civil War fame into production and to the troops in Crimea. So they were using that, which had the Minier bullet.
Yep.
The Russians were pushing a rifle, a Minier style Russian rifle. It has a designation. I want to say it's 1856, so it came out like just towards the end. A lot of them had percussion smoothbore muskets, the Russians, and also the reserves would have flintlocks from the Napoleonic War.
Oh. Jesus,
yeah, you see very few in the movie. I honestly think when they have like the siege of the Alma, I honestly think the extras are just holding black sticks with like a bayonet attached to the end of it, because you see one of them run, and it just looks like he's holding a fence post. Like it's
He probably was.
yeah, it's not a bad thing, but that's what they should be earning. What they should be using. It is still smoothbore cannons and whatnot. I don't think the Dahlgren was around.
Well, so there would have been probably like a bunch of smoothbore shit that was like retrofitted, like a flintlock that was retrofitted with a cap and ball, kind of thing. Like, but I don't know the models. This is way beyond my wheelhouse of knowledge. So
Sean, I wish that you were with us when we did Fields of Honor. I know we keep coming back to that. But
my chassepot is like right over there.
how different is the French Army now to then? I mean, it's about 15 years.
The French Army was much more professional to the British Army. Remember, the French had been in war in Algeria before this. You missed it, Nate. You got to go back. Before we had the movie up, the French Army was much more professional because it was the Napoleonic Army of Fame beforehand. Louis Napoleon wanted to show off the French Army again, but they had also invaded Algeria in 1830, so they had more combat experience. They had a medical corps. They had a better supply department than the British did, which the British basically tried to save as much money as they fucking could. So the French Army was leagues better than the British. Leagues better.
Really quick question, because I actually don't know, who were they fighting in the 1830s in Algeria? Who were they fighting Algerians, or were they fighting another?
Oh, so they took over Algeria,
Algerians,
right?
Yeah. What formal army Algeria had, and then Algerian guerrillas.
Okay, so yeah, they weren't fighting another power. Okay.
No.
Does that play at all into the raiding parties? What was it? When the Americans went against the pirates, the Barbary pirates and everything, does that have anything to play with it at all?
The 1780s? No.
Oh,
not exactly. That's way early. That's early.
Tripoli's in Libya too, correct? Or is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I thought there was some kind of American naval battles in the 1820s in the Mediterranean. I could be wrong. probably am.
Yeah,
But,
it's out of all of our wheelhouses. It's like
the last thing I want to touch on too is, again, because I wish that you were there and you'd brought this up to me, Sean. And if anybody's a listener to our podcast every week, I wanted them to know this. But there's something we fucked up when we talked about the Franco-Prussian War. It was allegiances or alliances after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And Sean, you'd mentioned what happens with Russia and France after that. How they basically
the 1890s Treaty of Alliance between France and Russia. As the French are defeated in the Franco-Prussian War, they basically determined that they will never face Germany alone again. So they enlist Russia. Basically, Russia had a huge railroad boom going on, and the French
funded it.
Funded it. Yeah, the Witte boom. That was the railway minister, who was like the only smart guy in the Tsar's cabinet. The French bankers funded it, and that's how they secured the alliance of defensive alliance with the Russians.
Which is what pulled France in 1914, inevitably.
Yeah, and that is why France was able to survive, because the Russians, who were also experienced from the Russo-Japanese War, were able to get mobilized and moving quick.
Yeah, because they fucked up, and like and in 1912 when they had the maneuvers, and they were like, the Russians completely fucked that one up. They're like, okay, this is not going to happen again. And then in 14, the Prussians and the Austro-Hungarians, they didn't expect Russia to be able to mobilize that fast, because they were like, oh, we saw what they did in 12. They can't fucking mobilize.
Not going to be a problem,
But they did. That's the issue. It was like they did, and whatever. But that's World War I. That's, Jesus Christ, that would take probably 12 episodes, at least an hour apiece, just to go through that shit.
But this is more like the Baltics, not the Baltics, the Balkan states kind of come out of this
Mm-hmm.
war. Their independence movements, and thus leads into the various Balkan conflicts, and eventually that is what makes the pot of World War I boil over.
Because in typical European fashion, it was like after the Crimean War, when all these different ethnic groups and religions were living in the same area. They're like, you guys do your own thing and become countries. And
the Greek War of Independence is also something.
Well, the Greeks were never mentioned in this film either. Never.
They're not. There was actually a Greek legion in Sevastopol, because obviously they hated the Ottomans. The Greeks had won their independence in the 1820s or the 30s. I'm not totally versed in the Greek War of Independence, but around that time, that the Greek the Greek gains independence and the Ottomans start to wane. It's really obvious what's happening now, and that's what kicks us off.
And I just want to say, for the record, for this podcast, I was going to say this earlier, but like, when we say Turks, we actually mean Ottomans, because it's the Ottoman Empire is from the 15th century, or I'm sorry, 16th century until 1919, basically. And the Turks came on like the late 20s and 30s. But like, when we say Turks,
back
we
to
obviously
the
know
1300s, but it's shorthand, because most of them were Balkan Christians or from North Africa.
That's the thing. It's so convoluted. That's the problem.
But they're totally written out of this movie. So
and that's the thing.
If you're looking from this movie, you're going to be let down.
The Ottomans and the Greeks are not in this, and it's like, I mean,
that's why I like certain things this movie does, but it leaves a lot out. Like, it tries to put that. I don't know if we want to close the thoughts, but it tries to put that that Cardigan Nolan thing. It kind of makes up that whole rivalry.
Right, and they also spent so much time with just like the aristocratic like culture and like the shit they did. It's like you could have spent a lot of more time formulating like kind of these different alliances and like the different. You don't have to go into detail, but like just kind of show that instead of the British aristocracy in the 1850s. Like, okay, we get a taste of that, but like, okay.
I think this is a good time we could start to move into ratings, with everything. But yeah, it's a very interesting film. It's very, one from its time. It does so much. I feel like it breaks that rule of just trying to do too much. Like, keep it simple, stupid. Just, is it a film about aristocracy? Is it a film about, the Crimean War? Is it a film about Nathan not trying to find a commercial?
I laughed because it was the fall of Sebastopol Fox.
Yeah, it was Sebastopol Fox, and then a windmill of peace over a Mustang. I don't
see Mouse. Wow.
Yep, exactly.
No, it's 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 a very interesting film from when it was made, and
yes, give you a rating.
Let's start with the ratings.
You start it. You already have.
Well, taking everything into consideration we've said, I mean, it just tries to do too much, and it's really a product of its time. I like a lot of things about it. I don't like a lot of things about it. I really feel like you can cut like 25 minutes from the beginning and make it better. Once they're in Crimea, it's great. The battle sequences are very interesting. I like how they're shot, but at other points, it just looks like reenactors shooting blanks at each other and not dying. But I love how some of them are so wide. And they really do try to, show the terrain of Crimea, because it's a very interesting place. Not a lot of the world looks like Crimea. And luckily they found some of that in England. It's not
Turkey,
like forests and things
actually.
or really Turkey. Oh,
Turkey,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, it makes sense.
That's where
yeah.
we were shot. So close.
Yeah, right. But close to home. But it's very interesting. But overall, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's worth watching, and as Sean has proven here, and like other films have proven, it gets you interested, and it gets you wanting to read about it, and then it gets you to find the facts of the matter. And during that process, if the original source material that got you involved wanes, and how you view it, it still got you there. So it's definitely worth checking out, and it's the best film about the Crimean War, in my opinion. It's very interesting. I went into this thinking like, oh, the Light Brigade was one thing, but coming out of it and doing a little bit of research, it really was completely something different. And it just goes to show how we prepare to fight the last war, and we have to be fluid to new ways of fighting. And that just because you were an adjutant of a great general, Wellington, doesn't mean that you have to live in their shadow. So,
couldn't they put it at one of the railway stations?
What do you have to think about it, Michael?
I thought I quite liked it. Like I say, I don't know much about this history, and I'm sure if I was like Sean, I would, just eviscerate it. But no, I think because I'm pretty unforgivable when it comes to that stuff. But I was entertained by it. I actually did like all the stuff back. There's an hour before we even get to the war, and I actually did like most of that. I thought it was interesting. I was like I said, I was never bored while watching it. So I think I will give it a 7 out of 10. And I will pass it on to Mike.
Yeah. So everything we talked about, I really wish they would have used that first hour to explain more about like the upcoming like balkanization of that region of what was being contested at that point, because that would give people not only the interest of like the Crimean War and how that influenced so many future conflicts, but also how the Balkans came to exist. And it's like, again, you don't have to do a nerdy deep dive, just like show people talking to each other. Like if you want to show the British aristocracy, show them talking to the future leaders of the Balkan states that became that, and like their problems with the Ottomans and the Greeks and whatever. I wish it would have been more well spent on that. Now, when we get to the actual war, this looks like from all the pictures I've seen, this looks like the Crimean area, like southern Ukraine, which is now southern Ukraine. But like it looks a lot like that, and from like World War II, people describe it as just it's steppes, but it's like more rolling hills, but it's just fucking nothing. So I like that they actually shot on a place that looked like where the battle took place, and also that they brought their wives and their families, like a lot of the officers.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect.
1 in 6, we're allowed to bring.
That's a good touch, even though it's like. Nowadays, you can't even fucking fathom that, but like, it was, and even in the Napoleonic Wars, like they would bring their families to just sit there and watch the battle. And it's like, it's so different from nowadays. So that was a good touch. The acting was good, I think. Like I can't tell the uniforms. I'm not going to even comment on the uniforms or the weaponry.
They're good. The uniforms are good.
Okay, yeah, because I have no fucking clue, and I'm not going to, whatever. To me, I'm just an idiot that looks on and okay, it looks good. But the acting was really good. A lot of the little niche details, or niche as Brian would say, niche details that they actually took into consideration, like the families being there in the tents, 18 inches, blah, blah, blah. that I respect that because I did research even in '68 when the research was a lot harder to fucking do. We didn't have the internet, so I like that. As far as the entire film, I don't know if it's because I'm just feeling off today. I'm kind of like sickly, but like it's just kind of for the first like hour and a half, it's just pretty fucking boring. And again, that's just my opinion. That's not a fact. It's like, okay, I get it. But as far as being entertaining, the filmmaking itself was pretty good. The shots and everything, I don't have a problem with. And I just wish they would have gone more into like the actual, like I said. And so yeah, I'm gonna give this a 5 out of 10 because I think they just could have done so much more by doing so much less and just kind of fucking narrowing it down to what happened instead of this feud between these British officers and other things like showing about the culture and shit like that. It's like, yeah, at a certain point you get it. And it's like, yeah, whatever. Do we need to see another fucking dance? Really? Like, that's the kind of thing. But yeah, so 5 out of 10. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it. It was just kind of like, ugh. Okay. So, yeah. Sir Sean.
When I first watched this movie, I really, really liked it. It got me down this rabbit hole, and I wanted you guys to review it, and thus I'm here. My opinion has lessened a little bit now that I know way more about it. I think the first half of the movie could have been shortened to maybe 20 minutes. And there's so much more you could have unpacked and shown that whole the aristocracy and all that. There's so much better ways to do that with the Crimean conflict. The Scutari barracks, if you've ever heard about that, that is where the Red Cross comes from. Florence Nightingale, the Red Cross, and all that, where they had 3 miles of beds and not 18 inches in between each bed. And it was just packed full of guys. You could have shown that. You could have had the Turks in the movie somehow, or the French more. It's just that first half of the movie kind of ruins it for me. Has kind of ruined it for me. Once they get to the Crimea, I think it does do a good job. I just think, yeah, the first half was kind of a waste. So I'll give it a 5 out of 10 as well.
Right. That's only one more left.
That's how that works.
I mean, we kind of did a different rhythm today, so I guess I'll start off with what I did like. I mean, I liked a lot of the training. I liked a lot of the look into the training because I think I just don't have that much expertise in that era. So getting an insight into that training and that kind of mindset, I liked half of the officer quarreling and the getting to know kind of like the gentleman's era and kind of understanding how narcissistic these people are, and kind of going through that and knowing that already, but just getting more of a deep dive into the setting of this movie in particularly. And then I really liked. I always think cavalry is in a film is always very impressive, and I know how much effort that takes, especially to keep people safe. So I think a movie that has that, you can see a lot of effort into that. And I know that's a thing you see it a lot in the 60s and the 70s. And it's still very impressive to see. The weaponry, I don't know that much about it. Looked impressive. I didn't see the sticks that Sean was talking about.
It was earlier in that battle.
Oh, okay.
It was way earlier.
Gotcha. Okay, I believe it though. Then there's other things that I kind of was like, okay, everyone's kind of touched on already, but how long they were in Europe, in England, and then how just some of the kind of just. Okay, we get it. Okay, we get it. Okay, we get it. Okay, we get it. So, but nothing really screamed at me about it, and I think but nothing really like detracted from it other than the too much training and everything. But I can't think of anything cinematically. Just because I always talk about the editing and the cinematography felt very much 1960s, 1970s. But it wasn't bad, but there were a lot of like up close of the time shots, which I always kind of go, all right, yeah, I get it. But overall, no, I mean, like I liked it. This is definitely an insight into an era that I didn't quite know, and so I think I'm gonna give it 3 good smacks, and I think I'm gonna give it I think I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10 Scream Mel Gibsons. And this is not love, so it's fine.
Should have been the tagline of the movie.
Yeah.
This is not love.
So everyone, you're gonna have to watch that to get that one. But anyway,
Well, Sean, this rating is in your handwriting, so it's actually your fault.
I've lost the Light Brigade.
I'm just you lost Light Brigade this week, so
Yeah, it wasn't my trick.
Sean, Nathan, you know Sean's handwriting. This isn't mine.
no. Sean transcribed that totally wrong. And
even though he transcribed it exactly what he said, he repeated it back to him. And
I'm just gonna go send something to the War Department quick. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Hold his mail. But so putting the scores in, we get a score of 5.9. So it's worth it to learn about history before you go on Wikipedia and read a book about it. So it's interesting.
As we have said, any movie that can do that does a good job. At least doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. Any movie, I think we've always said unless it's fucking Hyena Road, every movie's good to watch. So.
Yep. Right.
Well, Midway.
Midway has a hot. Midway's like middle of the road now.
Forgot all about Midway.
No.
That was with a 0.1 from Mike A.
So, this is one last thing I want to touch on
Sure.
before this is over. So, you have the Crimean War, and it's this horrible, bloody modern conflict in the 1850s, and it's fought on the steppes of Crimea around Sevastopol. And all these things happen, and all these guys die, and they all get buried, and everyone goes home until Germany invades Russia in 1941. And in the spring of 1942, they're heavily besieged Sevastopol, and they literally dig in the same places and the same cemeteries where these guys died 80 years, 90 years before. And when you read a lot of the battles in Crimea, it's just crazy where they talk about digging into the English cemetery or the French cemetery or these things later on. And it's Germans fighting Russians, or all this shit happened before.
Well, it's also, you can't forget this because it's also ironic. A lot of Romanians in Sevastopol.
Oh yeah,
a lot of Romanians. But it's funny because the Romanians were a reason for that whole thing happening.
Yeah.
And then you got Romanians who actually made up a big part of the defense of Sevastopol initially. And it's like, do we ever fucking learn? Do we ever move past our blunders in the past? It's just insane. We pay for our ancestors' fuck ups a lot.
In a way, yep.
You know?
I just sent a link to you guys for the actual bugle call, and I was wrong. It was recorded in 1890 from the bugler from that, and we will hopefully, if we can, we'll put it at the end of the podcast, or we'll link it in the other thing. But it's pretty crazy to, same guy, however many years later, 34, 35, same bugle, and same call. So hopefully
he
you
can
guys
still do
learned
it.
something.
He's remembered it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Hopefully you guys learned something. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
I learned a lot. It was really cool.
Yep.
And I'm glad I don't have to form into squares and fight cavalry. Nice not to do that.
Or ride directly at it.
It'd be a bitch to fight a fucking hill. It'd be a bitch to fight a hill,
Yeah.
The closest I want to come to Russian guns is a Victoria's Cross. So that's about it. So.
Jesus.
Cool, guys. Well, catch you next time.
Who the fuck's hot miking, by the way?
Yeah, whose TV is going on right now? Is that you, Brian?
No.
Mike
Sean?
A, is that you?
Yeah, that's
okay, that's
you.
fine. That's okay.
No, that's
The Real Housewives of New Jersey in the back.
that's Jamie. She's in the shower. She listens to stuff when she's in the shower.
Okay, is that the midget real world thing?
I don't. No, she watches that. She doesn't listen to it.
Okay,
But I don't know. She's listening to some. She's coincidentally listening to some podcast in there. So. So.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a rating. Otherwise, Mel Gibson won't stop screaming. If you like this content, make sure to check out our Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram pages. If you want to directly support our work, make sure to check out our Patreon. All these links are in the description below. Until the next time, Scuttlebutt out.